In 2023, single-person households became the most common living arrangement in Canada for the first time in the nation's history. More than 4 million Canadians now live alone. That's more people than the entire population of British Columbia. This isn't a trend. It's a transformation, and it's accelerating faster than almost anyone predicted. The implications stretch far beyond dating apps and Valentine's Day sales. This shift is quietly rewriting Canada's economic future, its housing crisis, and the very structure of its communities. What's happening in Canada isn't unique, but the speed is unprecedented. And the forces driving it reveal something unsettling about modern life in wealthy nations. If you're finding this valuable, hit that subscribe button. This channel breaks down the hidden systems reshaping our world. Asterisk, asterisk. Hashtag, the architecture of isolation. The numbers tell a story most Canadians haven't fully processed yet. Between 2016 and 2021, single-person households grew by 8.3%. Traditional family households grew by just 2.7%. In Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, cities that hold nearly a third of Canada's population, solo living isn't an outlier anymore. It's becoming the default. But this wasn't always the case. In 1981, only 20% of Canadian households contained just one person. By 2001, it was 26%. Now it's pushing past 29%, and projections suggest it could hit 35% by 2035. To understand why this is happening requires looking at three converging forces: economics, culture, and design. The economic explanation appears straightforward at first. Canadians are marrying later. In 1975, the median age at first marriage was 23 for women and 25 for men. Today, it's 29 and 31. That's 6 additional years of solo or non-married living for millions of people. Divorce rates, while slightly declining from their peak, remain high enough that approximately 38% of marriages end before their 30th anniversary. Each divorce often creates 2 single-person households where one family household existed before. But the deeper economic force is less obvious. Housing prices in Canada's major cities have created a perverse incentive structure. In Vancouver, the average home costs over 13 times the median household income. In Toronto, it's nearly 12 times. These ratios are among the highest in the developed world. When home ownership feels impossible for couples, it feels doubly impossible for singles. Yet, paradoxically, remaining single and renting becomes more economically rational than trying to save for a down payment while supporting a partner or family. The rental market has adapted accordingly. Developers have discovered that building micro-condos and one-bedroom units generates higher profits per square foot than family-sized apartments. Between 2016 and 2023, construction of bachelor and one-bedroom units in Toronto increased by 47%, while 3-bedroom units declined by 22%. The built environment itself is being redesigned around the assumption of single occupancy. Hashtag, the cultural disconnection. Canadian culture has undergone a quiet revolution in its understanding of relationships and success. The social pressure to marry by a certain age has weakened dramatically. In a 2022 Angus Reid survey, 44% of Canadians aged 25 to 34 said they felt no pressure whatsoever to be in a relationship. That number was 28% just 10 years earlier. This represents more than changing attitudes about marriage. It reflects a fundamental rewiring of how Canadians construct meaning and identity. Career achievement, personal growth, travel, hobbies, and friendships have all expanded to fill the space that romantic partnerships once dominated. Social media has accelerated this shift by making solo lifestyles appear not just acceptable, but aspirational. This is just the beginning. Subscribe to see how these patterns are reshaping economies worldwide. Asterisk. The language itself has evolved. Single no longer carries the connotation of lacking something. Terms like solo living and living alone have replaced it in many contexts, removing the implicit comparison to couple status. Dating app culture, despite its stated purpose of connecting people, may paradoxically be making long-term partnership more difficult. The abundance of apparent options creates a perpetual state of evaluation rather than commitment. Canadian psychologists have noted a measurable increase in what they call relationship hesitancy, the tendency to delay or avoid commitment due to fear of missing out on better options. Immigration patterns also play a role that rarely gets discussed. Canada admits approximately 400,000 immigrants annually, many arriving as single adults or students. International students, who number over 800,000 in Canada, overwhelmingly live alone or with roommates rather than with family. These populations skew the demographics toward single-person households while simultaneously struggling to form lasting relationships in an unfamiliar cultural environment. Then there's the role of work. Canada's labor market increasingly rewards mobility and flexibility. Career advancement often requires relocating between cities or provinces. Long-term relationships become logistically complicated when both partners face pressure to move for work. Remote work, paradoxically, hasn't solved this. While it eliminates commutes, it also eliminates one of the primary spaces where Canadians historically met romantic partners. #, the economics of one. The financial implications of this shift operate on multiple levels, and not all of them are visible in standard economic reporting. On the surface, single-person households appear economically disadvantaged. They lose the efficiency gains of shared expenses. A couple sharing a two-bedroom apartment pays less per person than two people in separate one-bedrooms. Groceries, utilities, streaming services, and transportation all cost more on a per capita basis for solo dwellers. But the aggregate economic picture tells a different story. Single-person households collectively represent enormous economic power. They consume more housing units. They purchase more appliances, more furniture, more electronics. They eat out more frequently, spending an estimated 35% more on restaurants per capita than people in couple households. The Canadian retail and service economy has quietly reoriented itself around these consumers. Real estate developers have been among the first to fully understand this shift. The profitability of small units isn't just about construction costs. It's about pricing psychology. A 450 square foot studio might sell for 70% of the price of a 900 square foot two-bedroom, but it costs less than 50% as much to build. The profit margins are substantially higher. In Toronto's downtown core, nearly 60% of new condo inventory consists of one-bedroom or bachelor units. Financial services have adapted too. Banks now market specifically to single-person households, offering products designed around the challenges of saving and investing alone. Life insurance companies have had to recalculate their models, as single people without dependents represent different risk profiles than married individuals. The entire apparatus of consumer capitalism has learned to extract value from isolation. Hit subscribe to stay ahead of the economic shifts most people don't see coming. But there's a hidden cost that doesn't appear in GDP calculations. Single-person households are dramatically less economically resilient in crisis situations. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Canadians living alone were 3 times more likely to face severe financial hardship than those in multi-person households. They had no one to share expenses with when income dropped. They couldn't pool resources or reduce housing costs. The social safety net had to stretch further to support them. This creates a long-term fiscal challenge for Canadian governments. As the population ages, more elderly Canadians will live alone. They'll require more government-funded support services, more healthcare interventions, more frequent hospitalizations. A person living with family typically receives informal care that never appears in government budgets. A person living alone requires formal care, which does. Some Canadian health economists project this could add $15 to $20 billion annually to provincial healthcare costs by 2040. #, the architecture of loneliness. Here's where the story gets darker. Canada is experiencing a documented loneliness epidemic that directly correlates with the rise in solo living. In 2023, 40% of Canadians reported feeling lonely regularly, up from 26% in 2019. The increase is steepest among people living alone. This isn't just about subjective feelings. Loneliness has measurable health impacts comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes per day, according to research from the University of British Columbia. It increases the risk of heart disease by 29%, stroke by 32%, and dementia by 50%. It weakens immune function and accelerates cognitive decline. The Canadian health system is beginning to confront loneliness as a public health crisis, but solutions remain elusive. The design of modern Canadian cities makes this worse. Unlike older neighborhoods built around walkability and public squares, post-1980 developments prioritize car dependency and privacy. They lack third places, spaces that aren't home or work where community interaction naturally occurs. Coffee shops and restaurants partially fill this role, but they require spending money, creating barriers for those on limited incomes. Digital technology, despite its promise of connection, appears to exacerbate isolation. The average Canadian spends over 7 hours daily on screens. Much of this time is spent in parasocial relationships, one-sided connections with content creators, influencers, or fictional characters. These provide the illusion of connection without its benefits. Brain imaging studies show that parasocial relationships activate different neural pathways than real relationships, providing less satisfaction and less stress reduction. Dating apps have fundamentally altered how Canadians meet partners, but the data suggests they're not making people happier. A 2023 study found that Canadians who met partners through apps reported lower relationship satisfaction than those who met through friends, work, or activities. Yet, apps now account for nearly 60% of new relationships in urban Canada. The paradox is that the efficiency of apps, their ability to sort through hundreds of potential partners quickly, may prevent the kind of gradual, unforced connection that produces lasting bonds. #who wins. The Canadian real estate industry is the clearest beneficiary of this transformation. Developers maximize profits by building smaller units for solo dwellers. Landlords benefit from having more tenants, as it distributes vacancy risk and justifies higher per square foot rents. Real estate investment trusts, which control an increasing share of Canadian rental housing, have openly stated in investor documents that the trend towards single-person households improves their financial outlook. Technology companies profit substantially. Apps designed for solo living, meal kit deliveries, on-demand services, dating platforms, entertainment streaming, collectively generate billions in annual revenue from Canadian users. These companies have every incentive to make solo living more convenient and appealing. They don't profit from couples sharing Netflix accounts or cooking together. They profit from individuals paying separately for everything. Subscribe now. We're exposing the systems that profit from keeping us apart. Certain retail sectors benefit enormously. Furniture companies sell more items. Appliance manufacturers sell more units. Telecommunications companies sell more individual plans. Even grocery stores benefit, as single shoppers purchase more packaged individual portion items at higher per ounce prices. The entire consumer economy generates more revenue per capita when people live alone. Interestingly, some service industries lose out. Family restaurants see declining business as fewer multi-generational groups dine out together. Minivan sales have collapsed. Wedding-related industries, while still substantial, are growing more slowly than the population. The entertainment industry has shifted toward at-home streaming rather than communal theater experiences, but this serves solo viewers more profitably. #who loses. Children and future generations face the most significant consequences, though they have no voice in this transformation. Canada's birth rate has fallen to 1.33 children per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1. This is directly connected to the rise in solo living and delayed partnership formation. Fewer stable partnerships mean fewer children. The average Canadian woman now has her first child at age 30.5, up from 26.7 in 1990. That 5-year delay significantly reduces the biological window for multiple children. The economic implications of a shrinking and aging population are profound. Fewer workers supporting more retirees means higher taxes or reduced services. It means labor shortages that suppress economic growth. It means schools closing, smaller consumer markets, and declining innovation. Canada's reliance on immigration to maintain population growth is essentially an admission that its own citizens are no longer reproducing at sufficient levels. Elderly Canadians living alone face the starkest immediate challenges. Without family support networks, they're more vulnerable to scams, medical emergencies, and social isolation. Canadian emergency rooms report increasing numbers of elderly patients whose problems stem not from acute medical issues, but from having no one to check on them regularly. Some go days without speaking to another human. Others fall and lie unable to reach a phone for hours. Middle-income Canadians arguably lose most economically. Wealthy individuals can purchase services to replace what partnerships and families once provided: housekeeping, meal preparation, companionship. Poor Canadians often maintain extended family networks out of economic necessity. But middle-income individuals living alone face the full economic burden without the resources to outsource it. They work full-time jobs, then return home to shoulder every domestic responsibility alone. The time poverty is exhausting. Communities themselves deteriorate. Neighborhoods with high concentrations of single-person households have less social cohesion. Residents are less likely to know their neighbors, less likely to participate in community organizations, less likely to volunteer. The social trust that makes communities functional erodes. Crime rates in some Canadian cities show correlations with the percentage of single-person households in specific neighborhoods, though the causality is complex. #, the invisible architecture. What makes this transformation particularly difficult to address is that no single institution caused it. There was no policy decision to make Canada a nation of singles. Instead, hundreds of independent trends, economic incentives, cultural shifts, technological changes, urban design patterns, aligned to produce this outcome. Each individual decision made sense in its own context. Collectively, they've restructured society. Canadian housing policy, for example, never explicitly targeted single-person households. But mortgage rules that require large down payments make home ownership harder for single-income buyers. Zoning regulations that restrict multi-unit housing reduce the availability of affordable family-sized apartments. Property tax structures that assess value by unit rather than occupancy incentivize building more small units. None of these policies were designed to promote solo living, but that's their collective effect. Similarly, labor market changes that reward flexibility and mobility weren't designed to undermine relationships, but they have that consequence. A career structure that expects people to relocate multiple times, work long hours, and remain constantly available makes stable partnerships logistically difficult. The normalization of precarious employment, contract work, gig economy jobs, short-term positions, makes people feel too economically unstable to commit to relationships or children. Cultural messaging reinforces this. Popular media increasingly portrays solo living as aspirational. Television shows, social media influencers, and advertising campaigns present single life as a time of personal growth, adventure, and freedom. They rarely show the loneliness, the financial strain, or the long-term consequences. The narrative has shifted from single for now to single by choice and loving it. #, the unsettling future. Current trends suggest Canada will continue moving toward a majority single society. If present patterns hold, by 2040, more than 35% of Canadian households will contain just one person. In major cities, it could exceed 45%. This will be a society structured entirely differently than any in human history. The psychological implications remain poorly understood. Humans evolved in small, tight-knit groups with extensive kinship networks. Our brains developed in environments of constant social interaction. What happens to a species that increasingly lives in isolation? Early research suggests potential consequences ranging from increased anxiety and depression rates to changes in cognitive development and emotional regulation. The political implications are easier to predict and perhaps more concerning. People without strong family ties vote differently. They're more supportive of government services because they lack private support networks. They're more focused on individual rights than collective obligations. They're less invested in long-term policy outcomes because they have fewer descendants who will experience the consequences. Canadian political strategists are beginning to recognize that single-person households represent a distinct and growing voting bloc with unique interests. The economic future looks increasingly fragile. A society of singles is a society of individuals bearing full risk alone. No shared income to cushion job loss. No partner's benefits when one loses insurance. No pooled resources to survive economic downturns. This makes the entire population more economically vulnerable. It also means less wealth accumulation, as single-person households save less and inherit less. Some Canadian economists predict this could reduce national savings rates by 15 to 20% over the next 2 decades, weakening investment capital and economic growth. What's most unsettling isn't that this is happening. It's that most Canadians don't realize it's happening. The transformation is gradual enough that it feels like individual choice rather than structural change. Each person who ends up living alone likely has specific, personal reasons. But zoom out, and the pattern becomes unmistakable. Canada is conducting a massive, unplanned experiment in social organization. No one knows what a nation of singles looks like long-term because it's never existed before. The Nordic countries, particularly Sweden, reached this point first and now face challenges Canada will soon encounter. But even their experience is less than 2 decades old. The full consequences won't be visible for another generation. What's clear is this: Canada's future will be shaped less by the families that form and more by the families that don't. By the children not born. By the partnerships not made. By the communities not built. The consequences of becoming a nation of singles won't show up in next quarter's GDP report or next year's election. They'll emerge slowly, over decades, as the accumulated weight of millions of individual decisions wreshes the country into something unrecognizable. And there's no blueprint for how to respond, because the forces driving this change aren't imposed from above. They're emerging from below, from the rational choices of millions of Canadians responding to the incentives they face. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. The question is whether anyone designed it at all.